Want to know what the movers and shakers of New Hampshire's performing arts are thinking? Welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted with your host, Ray Dudley.
You don't have anything else coming.
I know, God, this has been a terrible year.
Getting old sucks.
Oh, God, well, you wouldn't know.
I'm getting there.
Yeah?
I'm fast running behind you.
It is so good to have you again.
Thank you.
I'm glad
It's
you're
nice
here.
to see you. Have we started already?
It's all running, so.
Okay, great.
But that's all right. So, hey, I wanted to tell you, too, before we get too deep into the Hatbox stuff, I saw a documentary. I think it was a documentary, called a documentary, An Honest Liar.
Yep.
Have you seen that?
Yep.
With the amazing Randy?
Yep. Very good piece.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Randy is an interesting guy within our industry. He, basically he took that kind of skeptics route and really started to explore, especially because Uri Geller, who was the spoon bender and whatnot, he took great offense to the fact that he was getting more publicity than Randy was. And so he made it a lifelong crusade and gathered a bunch of people, and he said, look, who can figure out who has a better skeptical eye than a magician?
Yeah.
Because we see things that most other people can't see because of our training.
Right.
So, a really interesting guy. I have several of his books in my library, and not just his books that he's written, but actual books that were from his library that have his book plate that are in my library. I've never met him, but I have a bunch of friends who used to go to the Amazing Meeting every year, which was an event that Randy would put on, and they would have workshops on how to do skeptical inquiry and things of that nature.
So is there like this army of them that go out and do this? Or?
Not so much anymore. There was a time Randy was interesting in that when he got going, he wanted scientists to understand how easily they could be fooled. And he was really angry and upset at the way people were do you want to do a wraparound and we can talk? Okay, that's fine. Anyway,
making sure you're looking good.
He used several of his associates who were young magicians, up-and-coming magicians, and they did something called Project Alpha, which was an infiltration of these scientific studies on ESP, mind control, all
so
of these.
This was aside from the spoon benders.
This was beside from that, yeah. So, they were doing all of these different experiments, and these guys went in undercover and basically fooled the scientists, and then Randy pulled the rug out from everybody and said, oh, this is all a setup, it's all a fake, and both of them were believed to have, by these scientists that they had true psychic ability, and they were doing things that were completely impossible, and it was in fact one of those performers. Banachek is still a very, very prominent performer in the field of mentalism, and he has been a consultant to Chris Angel's Mind Freak television series,
is that right?
and a lot of the other series as well. And Uri Geller actually recently came out a few years back now, but he came out as a magician, and in fact I have a signed spoon from him.
You do?
And I never met him, but he created a DVD series on how he did all of his stuff.
Seriously?
Yes.
You mean he exposed how he...
Well, yeah, for a fee.
Yeah.
So one would say it's education, it's not exposure. But yeah, no, he's embraced himself as a magician, and he's been a featured performer, presenter, interviewee at a variety of magic conventions since then.
That's interesting. Have you ever tried to do the spoon bending thing?
I've done it a bunch of times for people, just for the fun of it. I've never, back when I was teaching theater, I often had, the kids would ask me to do hypnosis at the cast parties because they figured I must know how to do it, and I did. So I did it for them, and we had great fun. It was very entertaining. But I never did it professionally, and there's certain things that I don't like doing because I don't want to lend credence to things that I don't believe in myself. So hypnosis is one of those. Most stage hypnotists are, there may be some argument to be made for, beyond the placebo effect. There may be some reality to a certain amount of legitimate impact from these fields. But again, I don't believe in them myself, so I don't really want to add any credence to them. It's the same reason I stopped doing theatrical seances for 10 years, I did a show called An Evening with the Spirits. And we did it at West End Studio Theater down in Portsmouth. I did it at an inn in Bradford for 10 years. And I toured it to a number of other venues. And I stopped doing it ultimately because people were taking it way too seriously. Even though they signed a waiver at the beginning that said, "Oh, we won't hold the medium, responsible for wind rustling through keyholes and stuff like this." In fact, when I was doing it, it was kind of the height of Desert Storm, and during that time frame, and I was getting questions. There was a point where I would ask somebody to write a question on an envelope, and they'd seal it and they'd take it away with them. And later, if the conditions were suitable, my contact in the other side may wish to provide you with some resolution to the questions you seek. And I was getting questions from, will I ever see my daughter Sarah again? Questions about people who were off in the military who were serving across the seas. And it just was, you walked a very fine tightrope to create a convincing illusion of what might have occurred during this heyday of spiritualism in the late 1800s, but it was unsettling. To me, there's a lot of responsibility there. And, there was a magician, Joseph Dunninger, who was a mentalist, and in fact, he was probably the biggest mentalist of the 1925 to say 1940s or so. He used to have a radio show and a television show eventually, and he has a quote that is often used by other magicians, that to those who believe, no explanation is necessary. To those who don't believe, no explanation is possible. And so the idea is that depending on where you come at it from the perspective, and I may be mangling that quote, but to whichever perspective you come into it, I'm not going to convince you of anything. You're already coming to the table with your convictions, and so all I can do is work with what you've got. And it's not dissimilar to acting in a lot of ways. We all come to the table with our toolkit, and some of the best actors know what they're good at and know what they shouldn't try. And it's like anything else, sometimes it's more important to know what you shouldn't do rather than what you should do, whether it's auto maintenance. If somebody's having trouble with the engine, you don't start checking the brakes.
Right. You shouldn't.
You should. Doesn't mean you can't. They've all got boat payments, so at any rate.
So that's good. Well, that's interesting that you have been able to delineate what you want to do and not want to do. I'm not so sure that many people would have the courage or the integrity
or the foolishness
right,
to do it.
Yeah. That's impressive. I just wanted to get that out of the way, tell you that I saw that.
No, that's cool. And you enjoyed it? It was
I did. I mean, obviously it veers off later into his personal life.
Yeah.
But which is fine, because it's about him, basically. But it was very interesting to see how strong an advocate he was in preventing these people from ripping off. So when he got into the church stuff, especially, that was just
Peter Popoff, who's now out there peddling water.
Still, I know they don't
amazing.
stop, right?
These guys.
Well, Uri Geller was just as defiant.
Yep.
Towards the end.
Well, you know what? If there's anything to be learned from what happened in the 1970s with James Randi and Uri Geller and Peter Popoff and the whole faith healers thing, is that these things come in waves. And we're living in a time right now, it may not be faith healing, it may not be spoon bending, but we're living in a time where we have polarization in terms of ideas. And if you have fringe ideas, you shouldn't, there are some people who would suggest, well, you don't confront people about their ideas. You just let them have them. It's like, not talking about your crazy uncle who's a little bit racist. Yeah, he's our uncle. Just let him go, let him be. But there's a lot of crazy ideas out there right now. It's not just, spiritualists and faith healers and things of that nature, but there's some really crazy ideas about who we are as a community, as a society. And, it's a time where people don't want to confront one another, and some of the reluctance to confront has led to conditions where people take advantage of that. There's at one hand they will decry political correctness, and on the other hand they take full advantage of it to step on people. because you're feeling you can't talk about this, so I can talk about it, and I will steer the conversation where I want it to go.
So they take that reluctance as an acceptance, to be able to overrun them.
Right.
Is this mine?
Yeah, that's fine. That's our current season. We're already into the third show in our current season. So this is our 5th season at Hatbox, which is pretty remarkable.
I was going to ask you how many. So let's talk a little bit before we get into the shows themselves. And there's a lot of shows on there. How are you feeling about, it's your 5th year, you're saying, so now you're no longer the toddler. The Hatbox is now moving into adolescent age. How are you feeling about your place in the community, your acceptance? Are there things now that 5 years in you would change, wouldn't change, would like to change, wish you had changed? How are things doing? How are you feeling generally?
Oh, I'm feeling great. We have a really remarkable community of people who have stepped up to be part of the Hatbox experience. As any organization grows, you also need to evolve and kind of roll with what's working. So far, we haven't had any real pain. I mean, we've been since the day we've opened, we've been able to cover all of our costs and continue to improve the space and improve our capabilities solely on ticket sales. Every year, we've had our pitch night. We've had more groups every single year wanting to use the space. Our biggest challenge is really having enough space for all the groups that want to use it. I'm a big fan of a competitive process. I like people coming all together into one room and saying, here's what I want to do, here's my proposal, here's how I see it fitting within what you're doing. And then we have a group of people, our pitch review team, who sit down and review all of the proposals, read all the scripts, and then they go into a room, we lock the doors, and there's a bloody match until one man's left standing. No, it doesn't feel like that, really. The group is pretty good about going through the material and trying to see how it fits and put it together. But it's remarkable. Since we've opened, we've had almost 23,000 people come through our little 100-seat space, and we do 200-something performances a year.
23,000 at 100 at best.
Less.
At a right.
As you've seen.
Yeah.
Not every show is sold out.
That's remarkable. That you 23,000 people.
Yeah,
it's
in the sideshow world, you talk about grinding it out. Every day you just, you make your $1 million a nickel at a time. Yeah. And that's what's happening here. We're not making millions of dollars. We're still all volunteers. It's still all a cooperative space. The biggest challenges that we have is that people are starting to, in some ways, take us for granted. The fact that, you're an established space, and we're just going to get all of these services from you, and you're going to do all these things. And yet, each year it gets a little harder because people are maybe, they're starting to feel comfortable. I've been at the Hatbox 2 or 3 times. I don't really need to meet those deadlines that we've been told about. And so we have to chase people for promotional material. We have to help them more than you would expect of somebody else who has gone through the process. But it's like anything else. I think that this is an experiment. It'll last as long as as long as the community continues to support it. The way it might need to evolve and change is having people take a more active role in the day-to-day aspects of it.
What people would that be?
Well, that's a good question.
Or just volunteers?
It could be the groups. It could be volunteers. It could be audience members. We have a lot of things that we ask of our producers because they're getting 60% of the revenue. Mm-hmm. We expect a lot from them during the time frame that they're producing their show and they're in our space. We're starting to ask more of them to help us sell season program ads, to help us by showing up and for other people's performances and ushering, and kind of getting a chance to see. And part of that's not so much about the fact that we need the labor. It's more about trying to build the community and getting people to see each other's productions, to cross-pollinate the talent pool, because it's really easy. A lot of the production companies who come in have a small group of people that they like to work with, and they work really well with those people, and they come in, they do their thing, and then we don't see them again for a year. They might come and see one show or whatnot. We're really trying to get people to come in and see the other shows as well, and if they can come in and usher, they don't have to pay. Let's face it, most theater people are doing this more out of passion than out of lining their pockets. But we want that competitive feature at pitch night to be carried throughout the year. We want people to see what the other shows are doing and go, oh, I don't know if I can use this language, but I can't just half-ass it when I come into the Hatbox. I can't just be good enough. Those two words drive me crazy. People, oh, it's good enough. Is it? You start saying that for this, then you start saying that for this, and it's one of the things I'm going to be presenting. We have our Hatbox Performance Lab every month, which is an educational type of thing where we try to have different people who have knowledge and experience in particular areas to spend 2 hours in a workshop setting to kind of elevate the capability of the community. I'm going to be doing a presentation tomorrow on producing. And one of the things I always talk about when I talk to people who are producing something is that the earlier you can start, the more you can get out of the way at the beginning of the process, the less you have to compromise at the end. Because the closer you get to the deadline, the more you have to compromise. And so, when I work with new producers or even people new to working in Hatbox, I really try to get to spend a little time with them before they've even auditioned their shows to try to get a sense of, what do we need? What are we going to run into when we're using this space? How do we handle rehearsals? How do we handle the budget? All the things that producers need to know. But a lot of people think, and this is a flaw in the greater public. Theater, when I'm on the school board for a regional school district, and oftentimes theater is like the backwoods cousin to all of the other arts in some ways. It's like, oh, you all love to do it, and you just go up and you just make it happen. And they don't realize there's a substantial amount of training, there's a substantial amount of work, and really, theater is probably the one art form within our all of the arts that represent what people are likely to experience in real life when they get out to a job or career, because it's all project driven and it deals with every aspect of it. It deals with the onstage, the acting, it deals with writing, it deals with construction, it deals with engineering, it deals with marketing, it deals with financial and accounting,
team building.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things to get one show up. It's frankly a miracle that any show gets accomplished. And so for me as a performer, it's always a celebration. On stage, it's like, oh my gosh, we actually got here. It's actually
I can't tell you how many times I felt that way.
And that's why I think we form great bonds in theater when we work with people, because it's like we've been through a campaign. We've been in the trenches with you working. And I think we need to let audiences know more about that type of effort, because everybody walks in and just assumes, oh, it just fell together. None of it fell together.
Yeah, I know. It's because you can see if there's a concert, they understand that people are sitting there practicing, they're trying to get together. A dance recital, same thing. But a theater, they just show up and it's there already. It's already in their mind, it's happening. It just kind of plug and plays.
And we take advantage of that to some degree. I mean, at Hatbox, we do the produced plays. There are lots of people who pitch stuff that was written and produced elsewhere. So a lot of the heavy lifting was done by the original production company. But we also do a lot of original works. And when you're doing original works in the space, people, this is something that's new to everybody. It's never been seen before. The actors have to work harder because they have to really understand who these characters are. They don't have the luxury of going and looking at a movie version of a show or whatever, or picking up the choreography that was done in something, or even taking an approach, like looking at what Brando did in Cat in a Hot Tin Roof or whatever. You know what I mean? There's no shortcuts to those kind of things. And again, looking at us as an organization, as a venue, we provide a lot. We're not renting to people. They get to use it if they're on our season, but we provide them with ever-increasing lighting capability, sound capability, projections, equipment that they wouldn't get in other places without having to pay for that equipment. If somebody uses, let's say, the City Auditorium in Concord, it's a great venue, 875 seats plus or whatever, but if you rent that space, it costs you a certain amount of money. You also have to hire from a limited pool of people to run the sound on their equipment. You have to pay for a person to run on their light board, and that may not have the capability. At Hatbox, we've really tried to make it about making it easy for you to do really good work. And not all the production companies have been great or maybe they're hesitant. I don't want to say that they're not good. I want to say more that perhaps they're not fully aware of what is available to them, or they are aware and they assume that it takes less training or less capability to do. I can't tell you, I've had a number of people ask me, our show opens next week, can you work with me on the light board today? And that's, can I teach you lighting design a week before your show? No, I can't. But we did a performance lab just 6 months ago, and you didn't make it to that one. Take advantage of these things when they come up and learn the capabilities, or build a team of people who will have those sorts of capabilities. But I really pride ourselves as a venue of trying to constantly push what we offer and what we provide. Mm-hmm. And in some ways it can become challenging, because I have high aspirations and I get to see every show that comes in the space. And so I become the natural person to go to for companies to go, oh, do you think we could do this? And they use me as a sounding board for lots of stuff, which I love to do, by the way. However, I don't always have the time to do that. And sometimes there are groups who don't bother to ask at all. So it's about trying to find that, a happy medium, where people are asking for help early enough, or trying to be really creative and use the resources that we have, but to do it in a timely manner, in a way that we can accommodate their needs without it being an emergency. What is that? A lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine.
Right.
That kind of.
Well, it's kind of like a wedding, right? I mean, there's certain things you need to get out of the way early on.
Oh yeah.
Because you do not want to wait till the week before to
book
go
your
find
venue.
Right.
Yeah.
Or find a DJ, or you don't want to wait. So you get it out of the way early and get it done. As long as we're talking about your performance labs, why don't you go ahead and enumerate what other ones you have?
Well, right now, we still are filling the slots for this coming season. In the past, we've had scenic painting, we've had costume design, we've had stage management, we've had several different types of lighting workshops. I do 1 or 2 lighting workshops a year. Sometimes it's on running a light board, sometimes it's on moving lights, sometimes it's on the whole process of doing lighting design. This one coming up tomorrow is on production. That by the time people listen to this, it'll have gone by. But in November, we have one for Theater for Educators. And Nancy Brennan, who's an award-winning educator, she taught at John Stark Regional High School, and she has worked both at the New Hampshire Educational Theater Guild. She's done adjudications. She's a very accomplished actress in her own right. She's going to be doing a workshop for teachers and other people who want to learn how to use theater techniques to engage their audience, their students in the subject matter. And actually, for that one, because she has the training, she is actually offering credits. So teachers need a certain amount of.
So it'll be an accredited course?
It'll be an accredited course for hours towards the number of professional development hours they have to do. So we're hoping to continue and do more of those. We've got another stage management workshop that's going to come up in the spring. We have more lighting workshops coming up in the spring. I'd like to have some more movement, set design, things of that nature. So,
are you finding any of them being more popular than others?
Lighting, the technology ones really come in. Like we had a Q Lab. Since our first year, we had projections for our production of Christmas Carol, our first season and second season, and we made it very immersive. And we did, basically created this dreamscape using projections and movement and imagery that allowed us to change. Instantaneously when Scrooge travels in his dreams. When we travel in our dreams, we don't actually travel. We just appear from one place to another. So we took full advantage of that. And there were a number of people who came to Hatbox and saw those 2 years of Christmas Carol and went, wow, maybe we can use projections for stuff. So we taught a workshop on QLab, which is the software that we use currently. We've had a one on projections, on how to use projections, when and why to use projections. I'm not a huge fan of projections, honestly. I use projections for Christmas Carol because it fit organically with the idea of the dreamscape. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people want to use projections because it seems like an easy way to do scenery without having to paint it. Or an easy way without having to move stuff. That's very interesting. And actually, I just read an article that was in the Los Angeles Times, I think, on how the touring production of Frozen, Disney's Frozen, is using projections to do special effects on stage that look like real magic. So at one point, I guess Elsa punches the ground in in the film, and the ground starts cracks developing and ice and everything freezes. And I've seen some clips of the projection that they're using in the touring production, and it looks like the entire stage is being transformed in a way that you normally couldn't do in the past. So it is transforming the industry, and you can go online. Any show that you want to do, you can go online and find projection packages available. But in general, I'm an old school guy. I like to see practical effects whenever possible because they're more immediate. They're really, you can do all of this technology and have it all up there, and it may impact people, or they might just get awed and distracted by the technology, and it takes you out of the emotional reality of the scene. And at the end of the day, most stories can be told by an actor on a bare stage.
It's true.
And all of the rest is just about reinforcing the emotional content of the scene.
Great point. Great point.
Thanks.
All right. Good segue.
So that's Performance Lab. If you want to check them out, we have all of that stuff up on our website.
You do. Which is what?
Hatboxnh.com.
It is. Excellent. Excellent. All right, so let's get into your schedule. What do we got going on here?
We have a lot of stuff. Right now we're running Background Check by Greg Gaskell. It's a farce, an extreme farce. It's very, very funny. Lots of people running in and out of doors, and lots of missed identities kind of stuff. Across the season we have a blend of originals and produced plays, for lack of a better word, and we have some niche stuff. This year we are backing off a little on stand-up comedy. We have an improv group, so let's start with the non-main stage stuff first.
Sure.
We have our Music Out of the Box concert series, which is back for...
How popular is it? Is that pretty popular?
It does pretty well. People really like to come out for it. It's a whole different audience than the theater audience, which is why we like doing it, because Hatbox is about performing arts as a whole. I wish more people would take advantage of it. I wouldn't say that they sell terribly well, but we've had some incredible talent. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, we have a guy who grew up out my neck of the woods, out in Bradford, who, he left his home country, basically chased out as a refugee, and he came to the United States and taught himself how to play percussive guitar. He's completely self-taught and writes his own music, and he's going to be in our next concert series. Senier Hunt, he's an amazing guy. In fact, he's in the TEDx series that's about to be launched here in Concord. So we have Music Out of the Box, then we have Queen City Improv, which is coming back for monthly performances of their improv comedy. It's a great group of people. They've been performing down in Manchester, and last season they came up and did about 2/3 of our season with us and pitched and came back this year. Other short series stuff, of course, we have Discovering Magic, which is the monthly sleight of hand show. We also have Putting It Together, which is a series of workshop productions of new or emerging plays, and that's on Sunday nights. It's only 4 times this year, because it takes a lot of effort. They're rehearsing these new plays, and they do a staged reading of them, so they actually are bringing in some minimal scenery. And on a Sunday night at 6:30 p.m., you can come in and be part of the experience of seeing a show the first time it hits the stage.
Are those written locally, or are they're
from regional playwrights? So most of them are from playwrights either in New Hampshire, northern Massachusetts. I think he's gotten submissions from people in Vermont. I don't think we've had any yet from Maine. But that's produced by New World Theater and Donald Tung, who's done a bunch of shows in our space with New World Theater. Yes. So those are kind of the what we like to call our alternative programming. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty of the main stage shows. We've already had First Night by Jack Neary. Jack is an established playwright. He lives down in and around Lowell, but his plays have been produced throughout the Northeast pretty regularly. And he produced First Night, which was our first show of the 5th season, and it was really well done. We had a couple of really great actors that were in that piece. That ran for 2 weeks, and then we had a production of Love, Loss, and What I Wore, which was a pretty powerful show. It really takes the perspective of kind of the challenges that women deal with on a day-to-day basis, and it uses the kind of metaphorical language of the clothing that they wear and how it impacts their worlds and their life and themselves, and how it also helps them cope. And it was a very powerful piece. It got very, very great reactions from audiences. So we have a couple of kind of one-off things happening that aren't what I'd call the monthlies or series shows. We have a 24-hour play festival that's going to be coming up in November.
Oh, yeah.
So that literally within 24 hours, I believe by now the registration may be already full, but you sign up and you show up, and they will assign people to write the plays, they will assign people to direct the plays, and they'll assign people to act in those plays.
So this is the first time this is going to happen?
This is the first time it's happening at Hatbox. There have been 24-hour play festivals in other places. Most recently, I attended one down in Bedford, and that one was, I'm trying to remember who was the producer of that. At any rate, it basically it's a unique way for theater artists and enthusiasts to come together and kind of see what they can do, in terms of telling a story, in terms of shaping a story and presenting the story with just a finite amount of time, just that 24 hours to get in and do that work. So it's going to be on a Sunday night. It's not our normal 6:30 time for our late Sunday evening program. It's actually going to 7:30 to allow the actors and whatnot to have the time to do a full 24 hours, because they're going to start working on it on Saturday. The playwrights work overnight, and then they start rehearsing Sunday morning. And
so this is from scratch. They're writing it,
producing it, directing it, acting it, and then
so these are things that have never been put to paper.
Yep, it's terrifying.
That would be terrifying. So I've seen the 48-hour film festivals.
Yeah.
That would be pretty terrifying. It would be terrifying.
Well, thankfully, I mean, with the 48-hour film festivals, you have the additional challenge, I think, of the technical components. You've got to do the sound and camera and editing and all that kind of stuff. This is, maybe more achievable in 24 hours because you are there and you say your lines. And oftentimes, when I went to the one that was presented in Bedford, they were mostly off book. So they memorized these lines. Now, these aren't full-length plays. They're maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes. And I think they're hoping to have 6 or 8 at the most running for the evening. But to be able to memorize that. No, not that I'm aware of. Not in this particular case. It's literally a festival that's being kind of put together to challenge the people who want to participate, and for audiences to have an opportunity to kind of come out and see, again, an encapsulated sense of an entire production process in 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you went to the one in Bedford, was it well attended?
It was pretty well attended. I mean, they're a relatively small space. It was at the Bedford Town Hall.
Okay.
I want to say there's maybe 75 people there, and mostly friends of the actors and things of that nature. And then, of course, you have all the other teams who get a chance to see what the others have been working on in the last 24 hours. So with all of the attendees and the audience members, again, it's not something I would necessarily recommend to somebody who's thinking they're coming to see a fully produced play with beautiful sets and costumes and lights and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of guerrilla theater. You're kind of, and that's GUERRILLA, not
not GOR.
Not GOR. But a couple of other things that we're doing that are kind of one-offy things. We have the Granite State Puppet Invasion. Last December we had the first New Hampshire Puppet Slam, and it was a group of puppeteers led by this group called the Fantastical Puppetarium, who showed up. They did the Puppet Slam was about letting their hair down and doing material that they couldn't do in their day-to-day careers. Some of these are professional puppeteers, and they often tour for family audiences. Well, the Puppet Slam was material that they wanted to do that they couldn't do for their family audiences. So some of it might have dealt with content that was, challenging,
a little more than PG-13,
extreme, outrageous, yes, depending on how you want to look at it. And it sold out. I mean, it was one performance, but it sold out within a week. And the group has done festivals in lots of different places, so I encouraged them to submit a festival approach where we took an entire weekend and had a series of performers doing different shows. So people who are interested in puppeteering, either as a performer or as somebody who just likes to see puppets on stage, because let's face it, puppets are In fact, in the world of magic, puppets, animation is one of the magical effects. Making an inanimate object come to life is enchanting, and it's probably the most magical thing you can ever see.
So when we say puppets, this is not marionette kind of stuff, or it can be?
It can be. It's whatever the puppeteers deem it to be.
Socks with eyes? I mean, what? Is this Avenue Q kind of stuff?
Yes, to all of that. Marionettes, it's shadow puppets, it's hand puppets, it's full body puppets.
This is fascinating.
It's really interesting. So they have a series, they have 4 different shows, one of which is going to be the Puppet Slam, and that's going to be done earlier. I think we did it at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. This one's going to be a little earlier, but it's still an 18 and up show. But the other 3 performances are designed for family-friendly audiences. So, and they're bringing performers from around the region to come up and do.
So this is a one-day event?
That's actually a whole weekend.
Okay.
So the Puppet Festival is actually running from October 25th through the 27th. So the show's on Friday
it's coming
night.
Up.
Yeah. So Friday night, Saturday matinee, and then Saturday night, which is the Puppet Slam, and then Sunday matinee. So yeah, it's coming up at the end of this month.
Wow.
Provided you hear this in October.
Yes.
Of the year 2019.
By Monday.
Yeah, and then the 24-hour play festival is the week after that. So we have one weekend of our burlesque show. We had another burlesque company that's been doing burlesque in our space for the last 3 years. They did not pitch this year, and another group from the Seacoast, Lady Luck Burlesque, pitched, and they only wanted to do one weekend, so we just have them in for 2 performances only. That usually sells out because there's a real interest in alternative type of programming.
This is amazing to me. So you've got burlesque that's selling out. You've got puppet shows that are selling out. And some of these great plays don't sell out.
I think the challenge, and this is something that I'm going to be dealing with a little bit in my producer workshop, the challenge is communicating to the audience what they're going to be experiencing. And when you say, it's a puppet show, they don't care what you're doing. It's a puppet show. If you're doing a burlesque show, you don't even have to tell them what you're doing. It's a burlesque show. And it plays into what people's expectations are. And it's easier for them to say yes to. If you say, come and see smoke leaves on a dawn day, what does that mean?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. Is it a play? Is it a musical? Is it a melodrama? So the biggest challenge in a lot of new theater is to find ways to communicate the experience effectively to an audience to get away from that resistance. Let's face it, if people want to go see theater today, there's a lot of things that get in the way of that. Number one, they got to get dressed. They got to leave the house after they've come home from work.
They don't have to be dressed to go see a puppet show? Is that what you're saying to me?
I'm not saying anything, but we do have a certain dress code at Hatbox Theater.
Thank you.
Yes, as much for the performers as it is for the audience, and cleaning the seats. But we won't get into that.
Dang, that was a nasty image.
Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate you putting it out that way. No, so, that's the biggest challenge for any of these shows. That's why a lot of people, I just recently listened to the interview you did with Rob Dion.
Yeah.
And Rob's a great guy. I've known Rob for 30 years, since before he did Majestic Theater. I used to do a summer theater camp, and Rob was one of the guys that I hired to teach at the summer theater camp. He did a musical program there. It was great. And Rob does really wonderful work with Majestic, but a lot of what you have to do when you're programming a season is to figure out what's going to sell so you can make enough to pay the bills, and what can you do for art's sake. And how do you find a way to make that palatable to audiences? And one of the ways is always when you're programming is, what do people know? There's a reason Annie gets done a lot, because people know Annie. There's a reason Little Shop of Horrors gets done a lot, although not as frequently now as it used to. And the group that most recently did Little Shop at Hatbox took a different approach to it and countered expectations on the puppets. They still use puppets, but the largest of the 2 puppet plants were actually presented by a woman, a very large, dominating woman who represented, she was physicalized the plant. And it was a really fascinating and really ambitious thing to do. And, an audiences seem to respond very well to it. But whenever you try something new and step out of the expected convention of doing things, that's when you put yourself up to criticism. It also runs the risk of making what you do not be successful financially. So, I'm a big fan of trying to do the most creative and the most moving and the most innovative type of work in a way that is still accessible to audiences. We're not, a basement in New York where we're going to do performance art for 3 people, and that's our entire repertoire of stuff, because we can't afford to do that. However, I also don't want to just do the stuff that's financially driven. I want to do stuff that feeds the soul, and that feeds the soul of those who are presenting it, but also feeds the soul of those who are consuming it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we talked about this last time we talked. I'm a big fan of these short story collections. Every year they have the Greatest American Short Story Collections. And it's usually edited each year by a different established novelist or writer or whatever. And one year, Barbara Kingsolver wrote the introduction to it. She curated the thousands of short stories down to the 28 or whatever that were selected. And Barbara, in her introduction, said that what she liked about short stories was not something new that they told her, but rather how it showed her things she already knew from a different light, from a different perspective. And the beauty of live theater is that there's no wall, literally. I mean, there's a fourth wall, but it doesn't exist. The whole point is to move people through story, to get people to empathize, feel empathy for the characters that are on stage, and maybe, just maybe, walk away from the show changed just a little bit. You're not going to change everybody. People have a basic nature and basic personalities and things of that nature. But you might make them a little kinder. You might make them a little more reflective, even just for a little bit.
Sure.
And in repeated doses, that can have a major impact. And that's why when we try to produce stuff, it's one of the reasons we could easily say, nope, no more original work, because nobody wants to see that. Everybody wants to pay for it. They want to come and see the big musicals or whatever. Realistically, you need to have a little bit of both. It's like eating cake. I could eat cake every meal, every day, but my teeth would fall out and I'd get physically ill after not too much of it. And so you have to have a little bit of everything. And so we really do try to have a great deal of variety of what we do.
Yeah, what I'm really happy about the Hatbox and this burlesque and the puppet stuff really kind of highlights it, is that there are these niche audiences out there. It's kind of like looking at NASCAR, right? So NASCAR is this big umbrella, but within NASCAR, people are rabid about their driver. You have these little niche people that they love NASCAR, but they foam at the mouth about their driver, right? And they collect books on their driver. They have the decals for their driver, And so you've got this kind of underground movement of these individual drivers. And the same thing with these performing arts, right? You've got all these like niche little markets. And I'm glad that you're doing this, because most people wouldn't think of going to a puppet show. They wouldn't think of going to burlesque. But there are people who do love that stuff.
Right.
They're out there.
And you have to have a venue for them.
Yeah.
That's the biggest challenge. One of the reasons we started Hatbox was because there was not a place for a lot of these pieces to be done. There were types of shows that were not seen in the capital city of New Hampshire, of our state, because there wasn't a place to put them on. And so I really feel it's important that we do that. It's a major part of our mission is to provide that opportunity for people who have a passion and a dream and want to work in a particular area. I would love to open a second theater that is maybe even a little smaller than Hatbox, that's
really
more tailored to some of these experiences in a way that could be ongoing. I mean, in New Hampshire used to have a full-time puppet theater down in Peterborough.
Didn't know that.
Oh yeah, the New England Marionette Theater was in Peterborough for, I think it was over 11 or 12 years. It burned down, and when it burned down, it went away. And this was a theater that would stage operas predominantly.
What?
With marionettes, and they had school children. The schools would bus their kids to see these productions in Peterborough. You can still see some of the original puppets down at the Mariposa Museum in Peterborough, because the owner, he was wealthy enough to to have this as a hobby, so to speak. He funded the theater out of his own pocket, and he kept it open and alive and helped to fund the projects that came through. But what made that work was that he didn't just have 2 or 3 people doing it. He had people from all around the United States that wanted to be able to come and do pieces there periodically. So he would try to expose that audience to different people's work. And that's the same thing that we're trying to do at Hatbox. A lot of theater companies who just do their 3 or 4 shows a year, they have the same people who have been doing the design, who've been doing the lighting, who've been doing the directing for years, and a number of these companies are kind of hitting the wall and going, we're doing the same kind of work because this is the kind of work we like to do.
Yeah.
But we're seeing our audiences fall off. We're seeing the people who participate fall off. I think we're very fortunate in Concord that we have a very robust community. The community players of Concord has a significant membership. And while they do 3 or 4 shows a year, they've been branching out and doing more, shall we say, avant-garde work. And meaning people
at the Hatbox.
Well, yeah, we had one at the Hatbox
yeah.
that got letters because people were complaining about the language and things. But they also did the Farnsworth invention, which again they got complaints about because it wasn't arsenic and old lace or Harvey or whatever. But the reality is that audiences need to evolve as well. We're competing with what they can see on TV. We can compete with what's on cable or what's on YouTube or whatever. And so the newer audiences aren't interested in those necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think there's still a place for them. I think it's important to do classic works. And the great thing is again, we find our niches, and there are other companies, and you've interviewed Matt Cahoon, Theater Kapow. I mean, they have a very curated concept for the type of work that they want to do, which are up and coming, often with a feminist perspective, playwrights from around the United States, and classics like real heavy-duty Greek.
Ibsen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just real. And they produce it at a very high level. There's an audience for that, and I'm so glad that they're doing them. I love to go to see their shows. I unfortunately missed the latest one because I'm in a show right now, which I don't normally do. But we need more of that. We need more of our theater companies. And you had raised this point in Rob's interview. Are there too many theater companies? Or maybe it was Michael Curtis's. I was listening to that one recently, too.
It was in both, actually.
I think, we might have too many, and yet we don't have enough. Because they're not finding their niche. They're just going, let's put on a play. They don't have a defined sense of who they are and what they want to do. Let's just put on a play. And oftentimes it becomes a matter of who speaks loudest in the room. I want to do this show. These are my passion projects, and I want to do these. And oftentimes we end up, some of those passion projects are shows we shouldn't do because either we don't have the capability for it, and I'm not naming any particular organizations or people, but sometimes the stuff that we like is not the stuff that we should be performing. We need to be challenged by material, we need to be challenged by content, and we need to be challenged by the people we're working with. I mean, that's one of the, I'm in background check. I also designed the lights for it. I was hijacked into the show. They announced the cast list and my name was on it.
Hijacked?
Well, they were recruiting me, and I think there was a slight miscommunication as to whether I accepted the role or not, but the cast list got posted, and I went in. It wasn't a huge part. I think 97 or 99 lines or something, which isn't a lot, except when you're an old guy like me who hasn't had to memorize lines in a long time. But what I've found is that this cast are full of really remarkable, talented people. Yes. And it made me have to work harder. I couldn't just be good enough. I wanted to be around people who challenged me, who I went, wow, they're doing their A game. I got to come back at them with my A game in the service of the project. It's not a competitive piece as to who's trying to outshine one another. It's really more about who can support the work in a way.
I know. But you know what? This is one of the things I really do love about the Hatbox, regardless of the show. Is I love going and I love saying, oh my God, did they just throw down the gauntlet? Yeah. That show was, because iron sharpens iron, right? And it makes us all better. If it's not just a place where people are throwing up a show and going home and Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland kind of thing. I mean, this is where people from the industry who are friends, not competitors, but they move within that genre. They can go and see and say, oh, see, I cannot go do some junky little thing after seeing that thing, because we really now have to up our game.
Yeah.
And I love that. I really do love that. I think it's a very strong component of the Hatbox.
I'm glad that you feel that way, and I hope that everybody feels that way, because it really, again, when I say competition, it's really about inspiring.
Yeah,
it's about going in
word,
and seeing that type of work that makes you go, wow, now I really want to see what I can do. You know, it's not about this who's going to take home an award, because frankly the awards don't really matter except for publicity purposes. It's nice to get recognized, but for the most part, I want to go into a project, whether I'm just, doing lighting design or whatever, and I want to reflect the quality of the people who are around me. And the projects that I want to dedicate my time to are not the ones who are not going to challenge me. All right, I can bring lights up and down, or I can go out on stage and say the lines, but if nobody around me really cares enough to make it mean anything, then I don't really want to get involved that way. And so that's the other side of having a space that has so many different groups coming in different levels of talent, is that people do get a chance to see what the audiences are seeing. And when an audience comes away from a really good show and they're still talking about it when they're sitting in for your show, and you're sitting in the back of the room hearing these people talking about their other show, now you're comparing yours to the others. Again, not are they better people, but have we done the work? Have we really committed to the process?
Yeah.
Have we put in everything we can within, there are limits, the revenue limits.
But that's true too. But I love the fact that the theater itself forces a group to have to think, because it's very naked. There's nothing there except for the lights that are kind of there. There's nothing else there.
Right.
And if you're going to construct a home or a garden or whatever, you and make people believe it, you are starting from scratch, and it really is fascinating that it forces these groups to have to be innovative.
Well, I've long believed that constraint makes the finest art. Because if you have access to unlimited resources, unlimited funding, unlimited talent, then you're spending your whole time just trying to figure out what you're going to do. Whereas if you're given a space that's 21 feet wide by 24 feet deep and seating on 3 sides of you, and you have a week to put it up in, as far as to get in the space and then build it, you're stuck in a constraint where people are sitting on the side, so you can't put a wall here. You can't put a wall here.
Right.
You can't do this.
There's no second floor.
There's no second floor, although there are people who have done levels in the space that are reminiscent of what a second floor could be. But those constraints really make you make choices. Great art is about making great choices. And in some ways, working in the smaller space becomes more challenging in one way, because the intimacy of it means that people can see every detail. You're not hiding any warts from anybody on our stage. However, you take that and you roll with it and you make it even more important. If you're going to do detail, say, like we had a production that won a couple of awards at the New Hampshire Theatre Awards. Lovesick was the name of the piece, and it was a number of vignettes, very short pieces exploring relationships and the notion of love and where people are in their different relationships. And it was set in a shopping mart. And we're in a shopping center, and we had access to shelving. So what they did is they wanted to make it as realistic as possible for part of it. So they actually erected shelves and put stock and things on a very narrow piece of the set, and then the rest of it was left open for pieces to be brought in and brought out to infer the location. But the very detailed focal point of this show was this back wall that was the backdrop that was in the the store itself. And it was bookended by vignettes that started in the store and ended in the store. And the designer, Hannah Joy Smith, who worked on that, really went to town putting lots of little details in that one little piece, because it gave the audience something to bite into. And then when it was outside of that wall, audiences were like, oh, well, we're not on that wall, so we can be representational. So you can really do real finite, detailed work that is engaging to audiences. And then you can also be more metaphorical, more representational in what you're trying to do, to just establish a sense of locale. And it's really trying to find, making those decisions as a designer and as a director and as a producer, what you can and what you can't do.
We had several shows like that. I mean, Mr. Gaskell's show last year about the clown. Right, there was almost nothing on stage.
Right. Yeah, but they were on an island.
Yeah.
And it was paint on the floor, and that was it.
Right.
And it provided the edge of the island. That was the extent of it, but most of it was in the audience's mind.
Right.
And again, that's a great way to use it.
The boardwalk one with the took place colonial days or whatever, when she had to go find her
Amelia.
husband. Yes.
That was another Hannah Joy design.
What a wonderful show.
Hannah Joy had designed a lovely set of decks that was in the shape of a square, and in the center of the square was a step down, and that step down at one point represented the cellar hole of a house, and the decking was used to infer different locations and provide a barrier. But again, it was representational rather than realistic. So you can do either. I mean, True was done pretty realistically. They recreated, Square Peg worked hard to recreate Truman Capote's apartment and did some really cool stuff with projections. Having the window and projecting the passage of time, the duration of
I had no
show
idea that
really
even
cool.
happened until after opening night.
People
said,
were,
did that moon move? And I said,
people came up to me afterwards and they're like, oh my gosh, it started in the late afternoon and then it was evening and we never saw the window change. Well, you don't. You just all of a sudden realize that time has passed.
Yeah.
And that was a cool and creative way, and that was Dave Peck, who worked on projections, and Dave got inspired because of Christmas Carol and doing projections and using that for Kid Cult Cosmology. And so, it's a great example of how a small community can be inspired by each other to kind of come out and do different things. And the audience, let's face it, all theater makes no sense, really. Who stands up in front of a passive audience and declares their emotions and their love or their life or whatever? It's an artificial construct to begin with. However, it's incredibly compelling because we're all voyeurs at heart. We all, when you drive by an accident scene, you want to look, you want to see what's going on.
Right.
And magicians use that to their benefit for movement and non-movement. In the theater world, we can really use those constructs to our advantage. And another quote that I used to use with my theater students was, that which does not add detracts. And so knowing when to eliminate.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I don't remember where I heard this, but there used to be a thing where women, before they went out, back when women used to get dressed up and men used to get dressed up to go to the theater, they would get all fancied up. And the rule for women was, you put all of your things on, and when you're leaving the house, you just take one thing off. That you probably put too much on, so you take one thing off, and that's enough to make it distinctive. I don't know where that happened or where that came from, but it's true in the theater world. It's so easy to get so excited about an idea and then beat the audience over the head with it, when really you need to explore the edge of the idea and then pull back from it. So, and that's what rehearsal's about. That's what, that process is about. Let's push it to where we can go, and then pulling it back to where it serves the whole, rather than just the moment.
Right. Well, that was a long way from burlesque and
yeah, it was. At any rate, so we have lots of other things going on.
What else is happening?
Well, we have a really exciting thing coming up in November. We have Goblin Market, which is it's a musical about two young women in the Victorian era who grew up with these fantasy stories of goblins and things of that nature. And then they grew up and they went through puberty and they became adults and they started struggling with their their selves both as proper young ladies, but also as sensual human beings. And so this is, as they describe it, it's adapted from a poem and turned into a musical, but it's about these two women who are returned to the room that they grew up in and start reconciling their fantasies of being young girls and reconciling how they've become as young women. And it's described as Victorian erotica because it is a very very sensual in its approach, and this uses puppets. Actually has some puppets, it has some shadows, it has some very fantastic elements to it, a haunting score. It's a cast of 2 and puppeteers, but it's really, again, it's a flight of fancy, and it will take audiences to a place that they haven't been in a while. Might make them reflect on their times when they were younger. So that's one of those edgier pieces. Nobody has heard of it, but it's been award-winning in a lot of festivals and different types of theater events around the world. And now it's being produced by Not Your Mom's Musical Theater, who are returning to produce this show. Jamie Feinberg and Ross Boyd have traveled around the country in an RV, and they came back and they wanted to produce this. They produced a couple of things at Hatbox, and now they're coming around and really knuckling down for a couple of months. So that's Goblin Market. And then our holiday season comes back in. We have our 5th incarnation of A Christmas Carol, which my wife adapted for our first season. I directed the first 2. Our 3rd season was directed by Jackie Coffin, which was kind of a hybrid piece of projection and not projection, practical scenic. Last year's production also played off of, this is actually our 4th time doing it, but last year's production also was played in rep with Fruitcake last year, which was an original...
The Domini one, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a real fun little take on all of the Christmas stories in one comedic improv sensational thing, and it went really well. We had great experiences with them, but it was challenging putting the 2 shows alternating, because we literally alternated nights, and they used the same set. So this year we didn't want to put anybody through that trauma. And my wife has frankly been chomping at the bit. She's directed a couple of shows with my daughter through Three Witches Productions. She's done both Macbeth and Twelfth Night, and she wrote the adaptation. And this year we actually put out a request for submissions for directors, and we had 3 people apply. The 3rd one was my wife, and I was very surprised. I was like, I'm not surprised. She said she wanted to direct it, but I'm a husband. I don't always listen. Sorry, dear. You're not listening to this either. So, but she really wanted the opportunity to kind of take the adaptation she had done, tweak it, and to really
of the original Dickens
of her original adaptation, which goes back and really looks at the words from the original novella. And so she's taken it, and she's got a really great group of people that she's working with now. So that'll be running for 2 weeks in December. They'll be doing 8 performances of that, and then we're going to follow it with a 1-weekend run of Santaland Diaries, which is a one-man show. It was originally a short story or an essay by David Sedaris, and it's about becoming an elf and working at Macy's. It's very dark, it's very wry, it's very, very funny and disturbing simultaneously. And so that will be for 1 week only, and it's played by Toby Paul, who has directed a number of plays at the Hatbox through New World Theater, but he's also part of Queen City Improv.
Oh, I know Toby.
So
he was here. Yes,
and he was our Christmas present for the last for 2 years, maybe 3 years. I lose track. That's 1 weekend only. Then we're excited. After the first of the year, we actually are launching a musical from a new group to produce in Hatbox, Actors Singers of Nashua, which has a very long career producing musicals in the Nashua area. Came up and pitched the musical Title of Show, which is about 2 creators, a lyricist and a musician, who want to create a show that's going to kill at the festivals. And so this show is called Title of Show because they're literally trying to write the show in front of the audience. And they're not. It's a scripted play, but it really captures that sense of adventure of, all right, what can we do? What rules can we break? What rules can't we break?
Is it contemporary, or
yeah,
does
it's
it
a
take place in?
contemporary piece. Yeah, it's a contemporary piece. It's very, very funny. It's very dark. There's definitely some adult material in it, but it's all about this small group that are trying to put together a musical for festival. But it was produced on Broadway. It's got a soundtrack. I mean, it's a established musical, but it's almost an anti-musical in that it's not Miss Saigon. It's not, it's a bare stage, a piano, 4 actors, 4 chairs, and so they go and they do it. It's going to be a really fun piece. We have a 1-week run of Cripple Inside, which is an original play by Nick Hennessy. He goes by Lawrence is his actual name. Lawrence writes plays. He's produced a number of his works down in the Seacoast at the Players Ring, and he's actually going to be doing Crippled Inside at the Players Ring the week after it runs at Hatbox. So they'll run it for a week at Hatbox and then run it down to the Players Ring for 3 weeks. So it's the first production that I'm aware of to make that trek from Hatbox to the Players Ring. We've had a couple of Players Ring up to Hatbox, like Background Check was originally done at the Players Ring. But I'm very excited about the proximity of it. The fact that, and part of one of the things I'd like to see is we develop more venues like Hatbox. I'd like to see every state have 1 or 2 venues like Hatbox or the Players Ring, is that, some of these production companies can hopefully, a lot of the cost is in getting the show built the first time. And then they can do it again and again and again for a little cost and the opportunity to really kind of explore the play more fully. The longer you do a run, the more you learn about it. And so I'd love to see some of the shows that get produced at Hatbox move elsewhere. There is a show that's going to be happening, and we'll talk about it later in the spring, that's on the Players Ring that's coming up to Hatbox, and we'll talk about that in a minute or two. We have How It Works coming up, True Penny Arts. Michael Cobb has been a real great supporter of Hatbox Theater, and Michael, this is his first time directing in our space, but he's an accomplished actor, an accomplished vocal performer. He's done vocal training and he's taught at universities. He worked at Trinity down Rhode Island or Connecticut, I always forget which. At any rate, he has been chomping at the bit to get some real significant drama in our space that he's involved with, and so we're really excited to have How It Works. It's a dark play about family, and I think it's a 4-cast member play. It's basically an estranged husband and wife, and a girlfriend and a daughter. And it's a very, very powerful piece. Nice. Then we have a comedy, so it's nice to have it go from one end to the other. Then we have Lend Me a Tenor, which is a piece I had a little concern about doing, because the original work was done. It's a comedy, it's a farce. It's about people running in and out of doors, and about a tenor, an Italian tenor, in a production of Otello. But he's a white guy wearing blackface, and I was like, you can't do a white guy in blackface anymore. You just can't do it, and it shouldn't be done for so many reasons. And when they pitched the piece, I was very concerned with how are you going to do this. I thought, well, can you do it with a goatee and make him swarthy Mediterranean? But that's even still, you're dancing around it. I was very, very concerned about it. It's a really funny play, but it plays to stereotypes, and it played to stereotypes that I was not comfortable with. The new version of the play that's available for licensing, obviously I'm not the only person who was uncomfortable with this, but Ken Ludwig, who is the writer of the piece, actually reworked it so now because there's a lot of comedy in the fact that you don't know who the person is wearing the makeup. So he changed the opera to Pagliacci. Oh. So he's a clown. Yeah. So you have all of the same stuff without any of the risk of that. And I don't know if, I'm sure all of your listeners are very accomplished theater people and know all about this sort of stuff. But you don't have the license to materially change a produced or published work. So much as I would have liked to have made it Pagliacci, and ran with it. If the writer didn't do that, you're responsible for doing what the writer wrote. Contractually by the licensing. So I'm really glad that that's not the case, because it's a funny piece, and this group, Lend Me a Theater, came together as a group because they did lend me a tenor. That's why the name stuck. And this is their 10th anniversary as an organization.
This is Mo's group, right?
This is Mo Demers and Doris George and Kat Abdul-Wahid and Paul Smith is going to be back in it. But they've taken basically the whole cast that they had 10 years ago, and they're doing it again. So it's really exciting for them. They have a great audience because they tour all around the state and do a number of different venues.
They do.
And we're excited and happy for them to do that. Then that's followed by another comedy. Last season we had a really great experience with Stones in His Pockets, produced by Perseverance Productions and Scott Severance, who I know you know, and we've known. Scott's a fixture in New Hampshire theater. And it went over really well. People really loved the show.
That's the Irish one?
That's the Irish one, yeah. Two guys. It's when a movie company comes to Ireland, and they're filming a movie, and all of these extras are brought into play. And so it was played by two guys who played multiple characters throughout the show. Very moving piece. Very funny, but also very moving. And it was really well done. And they took it on to Rochester Performing Arts Center a week or two later, and I went down with them as lighting designer and helped them do the transition, which was a fun and neat experience to be able to pick up and move and reformat it for another space. But they pitched to come back. Scott produces and works with a company, Perseverance Productions, to tour a national production of Christmas Carol. So he's coming back from that and diving right into it with a number of regulars from Hatbox, some really accomplished actors, to produce the 39 Steps, where, again, the actors on the stage, and I think there are at most 4, play multiple characters, and it's a spoof on the Hitchcock film 39 Steps. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Then I'm producing something. This is one of those one-off things. It's called the Symposium of Forgotten Arts. And for one weekend, we're taking Hatbox and we're going to turn it into kind of part performance hall, part lecture hall, part workshop space. And we're going to be featuring, as a performer, I'm drawn to things that other people aren't doing. And, you know, the best way to hide a magic secret is to publish it. Because people are like, oh, that old hat, that was published years ago. Nobody's really going to buy that. That's where the best stuff is. Because people dismiss it because it's been published. It can't be any good. Well, there's a lot of performance pieces that we don't see nowadays. You know, there's an old type of puppeteering that tells a story. Nowadays, they call it an Appalachian shadow box, or sometimes it's called the oleo box, which is basically a roll drop. It's a piece of paper that rolls from left to right, and it has a draw, or right to left. I guess it's going from the right to the left. So you get to see it moving past you, kind of like in the old movies where they had somebody running down the street and they would just roll this. Yeah. Well, this would be illustrated with a story. So as it rolls, it's changing the scene behind it, and you use shadow puppets to tell a story or a tale. And this is something that's not seen very often anymore, but I know a couple of practitioners who do it, and I want to have one of them do this on stage so the audience can see something they've never seen before. I do an act called Trouble Wit, which goes back to the year, I'm going to get this wrong now, aren't I? It's 1676. 1676, a book was published that taught Trouble Wit. Trouble Wit's a paper folding act, where you take a folded piece of paper and you create different shapes with it, and it folds out and open and becomes a whole different thing, and then folds back down again. I'm one of 5 people on the planet that make them. And I've been presenting.
I never heard of it.
Yeah, I do it as part of my Harrington character shows. It's called the Philosophical Paper, and that was from the 1800s. But it's a fun little piece that I want to share with audiences. I have a couple of other people that I'm trying to get on board. R.P. Hale, who lives here in town, hand builds harpsichords and does things of that nature, and I want to get him to do some stuff. He's already talked about doing some things. I have a friend who's a bullwhip artist. I kid you not. He makes a living cracking bullwhips and doing lasso stuff, and I'm trying to get him involved. So we're basically putting together, I have a friend who's a tinsmith who makes, in fact, if you saw the Hateful Eight Quentin Tarantino's
Yes,
film.
yeah.
All of the tinware, the tin cups and things of that nature were made by this guy in Vermont. And I'm trying to get him to come down and present
For
workshops
all for this
on-
one symposium?
All for this one symposium. It's a whole weekend, and we're going to do a series of performances.
Wow.
And we're also going to have some talks and workshops on ways people used to entertain themselves back before there was music, before television and radio and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be an interesting weekend, and people have the option of coming to one show or one workshop or buying tickets for the entire event. So we're still kind of sculpting that event, but that's a one weekend thing
And that's
in April.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and again, we I'm going to run through these pretty quickly now because I don't want to spend all the time talking about a list of stuff that people can find where at hatboxnh.com.
Good plug.
However, I'm really excited by the next main stage production, Copenhagen by Michael Frayn. Copenhagen or Copenhagen, depending on where you come from, is a remarkable dramatic piece about math and science and philosophy, and it's a
Michael Frayn, isn't he the guy who wrote?
Noises Off, yes, yes. He's a very
Well.
intelligent person. It takes somebody with an analytical mind to be able to write an amazing farce like Noises Off. And so this actually is a reflection. It's produced by Phylloxera Productions, which is a company that did Invasion from Mars and have done a couple of other pieces on our show. Gary Locke really is fascinated by the stupidest things and the incredibly smartest things. So the pendulum has swung from fart jokes to mathematics, which is what we're doing in Copenhagen. And it's about a meeting of two scientists, and I think that audiences are going to get sucked into it. It has an amazing cast already. I'm not going to tell you too much about it till we get closer. But then the Community Players of Concord is once again going to do a production. They've gotten to a point now where they actually have been running a pitch at their board meeting for shows to pitch at Hatbox. So they have
no kidding.
a pitch before our pitch, which is great. And the one they decided they're going to continue their season of Simon to celebrate Neil Simon and his passing. They're doing The Dinner Party, which is a lesser known Neil Simon piece, and Brian Halpern is going to be directing that.
He is?
Yep. So that'll be a lot of fun. It has a great team of people. And then we're going to get back into a sensation of the Greek and Roman theater with Metamorphoses, which may or may not have a pool on stage. When I say pool, a pool of water that actors go in and out
Seriously?
of on stage. They, as part of their pitch, this is the most complete pitch I've ever seen. Old Town Theater, this was Zach Peacock. He came with a scale model of the set for this show that isn't going to happen until June.
Good time
and
for
he
swimming.
pitched it over a year, almost back in March, so well over a year before the play could have actually happened. So we're working through what can be done to do that, but that's classic storytelling, and one that touches on myth and gods and humans and also their interactions. So that will be really interesting. And then following along in that kind of that approach in terms of looking at what it means to be a human and our desires and our passions and what drives us, Hatbox is going to produce Man of La Mancha. And so
You guys are not afraid. I mean, you did 1776.
We didn't do
Barnum.
That was
Well,
Mammoth
okay,
Productions.
but I
That was
know,
another
but
company. But
I'm fascinated that you bring these, what are normally considered huge productions. You'd stick them in there.
yes, thank you. As you were just in Titanic, weren't you,
I
this
was.
past summer
I
up
was.
at Jean's Playhouse up
Yeah.
in Lincoln? We will not be doing Titanic.
Oh, okay.
Just in the same way, we will not be doing Miss Saigon.
Oh.
We will not be doing Phantom of the Opera, likely. There are certain shows, the spectacle shows. Les Mis, we might do Les Mis, actually, but that's, we'll see.
Okay.
The spectacle shows, the ones that really are reliant on lots of scenery or things of that nature, are very hard to do in the space. I'm always drawn to stories that are about human emotion and about relationships and characters. We did Barnum. People thought, how can you do Barnum, a big circus show in our tiny little space? And people who saw it walked away really moved and really impressed by a story they got to see, similar to the quote that I said earlier from Barbara Kingsolver, they got to see something that they expected to see, and yet they saw it in a whole new light.
Yeah, good
And that's what we're doing with Man of La Mancha. I'm directing it, which is it's a passion play of mine. I've always loved it. Since I was a little boy, I listened to the music with Richard Harris early on. Richard Kiley, excuse me, who played the original. It's a story of longing. It's a story of desire. It's a story of passion. It's a story of idealism, of the way the world should be, and making the world the way you need it to be. And we are in a time that this story really has so much to say about, who we are and what we put our passion and our time and energy in, and also to some degree about madness, about really exploring whether or not it's better to be mad and happy than to be sane and miserable. And,
That's an interesting challenge. That's a very interesting.
Well, the original was, it's set in a prison.
Right.
It's about a writer. It's about Cervantes, essentially, who wrote the story of Man of La Mancha. He was in prison for tax evasion, and he wrote this story, Man of La Mancha, about a writer in prison telling this story. Huh. And so, in some ways, you don't really need all of we can do things with lights. We can do this with really focused, really detailed effects. But all of this happens in Don Quixote's mind.
It's storytelling.
It's storytelling at its purest.
Yeah.
And what's beautiful is the arc of the writer during this is that everyone who begins doubting him or mocking him gets swept up into his world and sees his vision and wants to live there. They want to be a better person than the person they are, and if that means embracing this vision and moving towards it gets them a step closer to being the person that they wish they were, then it's worth any pain. And in some ways, Hatbox is my own windmill. I have wanted to do a theater for so many years, in part because I think that I have not seen very frequently the work that I want to see. And so I've tried to create a home, a space for people who have similar madness to mine and want to go on that journey to see the impossible dream, to really experience that, and to touch others in a way that they share the.
Well, this is what's basically happening with this whole thing, is just dreams. These are dreams of people that.
There's a theme. And it's interesting. I don't think that we could, and we got a couple more shows, but there's an arc to this, and it's not something that if I sat down and tried to plan the season and produce every single show myself, I don't think I would come up with as good an arc as what's come out of the organic, the zeitgeist of a group of people who are wanting to explore stories and explore ideas and explore emotions. We're all filtering it through what we experience on a daily basis. And so we've ended up with a season that really does touch on a lot of things that are impacting everyone as an individual. So very excited about Man of La Mancha. Some Holiday coming up next is the show that I was talking about earlier that is actually being presented at the Players Ring first and then is coming to Hatbox. The interesting thing about Some Holiday was that it was originally a film, and it premiered here in Concord. The writer, it was at the film festival that's held at Red River Theaters, and Some Holiday was originally a film that was then turned into a musical by Marina Altschiller and Justin Scarelli, who wrote the original story, and the film was shot in and around Concord. So for us to be able to bring that story back here, I'm not sure if I can recall. I want to say it was back in like 2009, 2008, 2009, in that era. So it's a really interesting piece, and it deals with relationships. and young people, and what the next step is from being an adolescent, and you mentioned this earlier, to trying to find a relationship and what's important. What is a relationship? Who are the people you want to surround yourself with? Who are you as a person once you start, putting your iron against other iron and trying to figure out what is this piece of iron going to be a pin, or is it going to be a sword? Or is it going to be a paperweight? It's about trying to find who you are. So it's gut-wrenching. The music's very lovely. Then we have Scene Changes, which is another New World Theater production, which is an original play by Donald Tongue. And Scene Changes is interesting because he wanted to do this around the Christmas season. This is about a local actor who inadvertently gets thrown into a production of A Christmas Carol, opposite an aging but incredibly talented actress who's touring the show, and he's a local actor who all of a sudden finds himself starring opposite someone who's a star. And so it's a really interesting it's a two-person play basically about this interaction and who they are and what they want and where they're at in their own respective lives. The actress is actually older quite a bit than it's the Cratchits. And so you get a whole different dynamic. And then we're closing out our season at the end of August with the Great Atlantic and Pacific Shakespeare Company, which is a play by Alan Lindsay, who is one of the Granite playwrights. They've staged a number of original pieces at Hatbox, and we love to have the fact that we're supporting new and original work. This particular piece is about the Great Atlantic and Pacific Shakespeare Company. It's kind of a hijinksy. It's about a company that may be going down. They don't have the money financially to do the tour. There's some relationships questions, and it's so you kind of get that costume drama in today. So it's a really, I think that's going to be a fun piece, and that's at the end of August. So it's a remarkable, every season. It blows my mind. I feel so grateful to the people who trust us enough to come out and want to produce their works in Hatbox, who want to commit to the effort and the challenges of mounting a theatrical production when on a shoestring and a dream, so to speak. But thankfully, so far, people have really embraced it and have gone way above and beyond what I could have hoped for and beyond what I ever could have done on my own. It really is, I am always surprised, I am always delighted. And as I tell people, the greatest joy I get in my life is if I can be involved in the creation of a piece of art and have the ability to witness the people who are experiencing it. So as much as I like being on stage, during the show, I'm on stage during background check. I'm a little outrageous. I'm playing an oversized character, both physically and personality wise. No stretch there. But I don't get to watch the audience. Yet most of the shows at Hatbox, I get to sit back and just watch the audience experience it, and I get to see the roller coaster that they're on, and the fact when something really important is happening, they're being affected emotionally, they lean in. You can see them really being drawn in. When they're startled, they jump back. When they laugh, they really laugh. And as a performer, when you're on stage, you don't get the pleasure of watching them enjoy what you're doing. You have your job, they have their job, and again, I have the enviable position of being able to sit back and watch audiences experience the gamut of emotion from a very privileged seat. And for that, every one of the producers, every one of the actors, every one of the designers, creative teams, I have nothing but an enormous amount of gratitude for that joy that they're giving me. So it's well worth it. I'll put this up so people can see it. Hatbox Theater, hatboxnh.com. And we hope that you'll get an opportunity to come. I want you back on stage at Hatbox again sometime soon, hopefully. Pitch is only, we have to say that too. Pitch Night 2020 is coming up in March. That's on the schedule here, I think. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I pulled it off of this one. Pitch Night's March 2nd. So we're less than 5 months away from our next
Comes
piece.
fast.
I've already put the bug in a few people's ears about some shows that I think would work really well.
Yeah.
One of the things I try to do, and I encourage our producers to do, and I'm going to encourage you to do it as well when you talk to people here, is let people know about pitch night, and let people know about the space, but tell them the shows you'd like to see. Like, what shows would you like to see in New Hampshire that haven't been done here? What
you ask
type
you?
of-
Don't
yeah.
ask you.
Oh no, I want to know what. What are you
I don't have a
pitching in mind?
clue. I don't have a clue. I didn't even know True existed, and yet Matt pulled it out of some memory that he had wanted to do for a long time, and I was fascinated by it. So, things like that. I am not the typical theater person. I am really not. I don't go to New York and see all the plays. I can't tell you who's on Broadway. I really don't know anything about it. I just love theater.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you a show I would... Oh, yeah, no, I take it back. There's a play called, it's either Bluebird or Blackbird. It was done with Jeff Daniels,
Is
I
that the
think.
jazz one?
No, it's a two-person play. Takes place in an office lunchroom. And I think it was Jeff Daniels, I think.
Sounds
that did it
familiar.
on stage. And he got all kinds of kudos for it. And it's about a guy who's in his 50s, and he's now working at this office complex, and this woman shows up, a little bit younger, and it's about years ago they had a relationship. And the whole night you kind of it's this back and forth cat and mouse game between the girl who now has come back to, you don't know if she's taunting him. Did he take advantage of her earlier on? Was she complicit in the relationship? And you don't know if she is now here to seek some kind of revenge, or is she actually wanting to rekindle the relationship? There's this vast age difference between the two. And it starts off in this pristine lunchroom, and it ends up, from what I understand, in this it's just the
This
place
was
is
on
dem-
Broadway just a couple of years ago.
Yes,
I remember seeing something
It's either
on the
called
Tonys for
Blackbird or
it.
Bluebird. I forget.
I don't remember the name, but it looks like sounds like a really interesting piece. And for the time, where we're all exploring what's appropriate, what's not
Right,
appropriate,
right.
how do you maintain a connection, a human connection with somebody while maintaining personal space, or maintaining, the roles.
Right.
I mean, it's a big deal in acting. I know in the play we're doing now, I won't be giving up too much, but my wife is not, we haven't been together in a long time, even though we're stuck together for reasons that are detailed in the play. But I have a girlfriend who's a lot younger than me, 30 years younger than me, and she's a stripper and got pregnant by me and all sorts of stuff. And so on stage, we had to, as actors, figure out how do we express physical intimacy on stage. It's not in the script. It doesn't say anywhere. And at one point, it was like, the director was like, well, I think you guys need to kiss, because you're separated for a long time and you all of a sudden see each other for the first time. There's lines in there about coming together. And it was, it was a challenge because we had to work out the physical details about how to do that. But you also kind of struggle with the, how do you do something so intimate with somebody who's not your partner, you have no relationship with, other than, a possible friendship or whatever. And how do you do that convincingly in a way that, again, reflects the scene, but then how do you do it in a responsible way that that takes care of the boundary issues and things of that nature? And so a lot of work in theater, is about pushing boundaries. How do you do that in a respectful way? And a lot of it's through conversation, really spending time getting comfortable with it, mapping things out, really making things easier. It's not a huge dramatic moment. It's actually played for significant laughs, but we took it
In a
very
Gaskell
seriously.
play?
In a
Laughs
Gaskell
in a
play. I know,
Gaskell
it's hard to
play.
believe, but it's true. But those are the things that, again, we work with every one of our production teams. We come in and we do a Hatbox rules thing, and that changes, as we come up with different things. But one of the things we talk about is that Hatbox is a safe space for actors, audiences, crew members, and things of that nature. We take very seriously any type of abuse, whether it's physical or substance or even just boundary issues, how you interact with somebody.
Yeah.
So those are things that we encourage people discuss well ahead of time and really work through. So, but we also, you need to be able to challenge audiences. So we have, this isn't something I've talked about with anybody, so I don't mind talking with you about it. We had rehearsal for background check at the Steeplegate Mall 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when there was a murder-suicide outside the mall.
I was gonna bring that up, but
We were rehearsing. We got reports on our tech that from Channel 9 announcing that there was an active shooting going on. So we shut down rehearsal. We blacked the doors. We locked the doors, and we sheltered in place, so to speak. We had no communication from the mall. We just did what was prudent. We also had another group, Goblin Market, was rehearsing in the rehearsal space, which
No
was
kidding.
120 feet away from where this all took place.
I didn't know that.
So it wasn't until I drove home that I remember hearing a couple of loud sounds, but I thought it was the roof or something, or thunder or something. And then afterwards, after we left rehearsal, because I called security, and security said, oh no, the police said it's okay, you can resume your normal operations or leave or whatever is fine. So afterwards, I drove around to see if there was anything still going on. And as I came around the building, the lights are up, the crime scene tape is up, and their little flags like you see on CSI are marking things on the ground, and there was a body in a sheet on the ground. It was shocking. It was startling. It was like I was not prepared for it. I drove around and I went, and there was a body on the ground
wow.
The mall never contacted us. The mall never let us know that it was over. I had to call the mall and find out, and they had good reasons for doing that. The police didn't want people to rush into the area or anything before they had figured everything out. But this was a situation that, it was deemed a murder-suicide because the guy had a relationship with a girl and they were broken up, and he tracked her down to the fitness center and shot her from in his car, I guess, and then shot himself. And, we have enormity of emotion, and we have an enormous amount of anxiety about lots of issues. And we have a lot of people who are challenged, whether it's not having a connection to other people, maybe it's financial, maybe it's location-wise, they feel like they can't grow, that nobody's accepting of them. There's lots of reasons for people to feel anxious, and when it comes down to what choices we make and how we respond to that anxiety, I have no idea why this guy thought it was appropriate to pick up a gun and kill somebody over his issue, but he did. And so in some ways, I want to look at what we do in theater, and again, theater's a safe place to explore dangerous topics. And in some ways, by creating the empathy that people should get when they walk away from a piece of theater, doesn't mean they feel good about it, but they may go, gosh, like I saw a production at the Players Ring of Hurly Burly. I don't know if you're familiar with Hurly Burly. So remarkable production, excellent job by the production team. The cast were amazing. It's a play I never ever want to see again. It was misogynistic, it was abusive, it was violent, there was no redeeming qualities about it except as a mirror.
God, yeah.
It made me walk away and go, I never want to be anything like any of those people.
Oh, that's a job well done then.
It is. It was again, I never want to see it again. I never need to see it again. It's accomplished what I think it intended. I don't know. Again, you can be very, like Quentin Tarantino with movies, you can be overly stylistic with violence. You can do that in some ways that can objectify and glorify things. I'm not saying anything that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that every choice you make as an artist has an impact. And I want to make sure that what we do, we can set it in a context so that when people walk away from it, they have the intended impact.
Yeah, that they're provoked on some level.
Yeah.
Level. I mean, not provoked, but I mean
challenged.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that people, we all need to be reminded that, of where we're at and what we think and what we believe, and we need to be challenged periodically, or reminded that maybe what we're thinking isn't the norm.
Ooh, that's good.
I know that's kind of heady topic, but at its base, theater can entertain and should entertain. It can educate and it should educate, but fundamentally it should enlighten. It should really give people another perspective on the things they already know, and maybe help them reshape what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been incredibly blessed, and I really appreciate all that your work that you're doing by bringing all these guests and all these artists on here with all these different perspectives. It's really creating a wonderful catalog of different perspectives within our industry, and to kind of maybe use that as a way to inspire up-and-coming artists who want to try and want to challenge.
Yeah, that'd be great, man.
Yeah, so thank you for doing that.
All right, yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else I can answer?
Heck, no, that was great. That was really enriching. Really enriching.
Well, thanks.
I'm glad you came down.
I love talking with you. I want to come back and interview you at some point because I feel like we got into a couple of things today, but I think you're holding back on a lot of stuff.
Deep. Yeah, I don't go very deep. I don't come out of my cave. So.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Yes, sir.